Hi, everyone. I am Gabe Smith, CCXP, and I am the Content Manager and Associate Director for the Customer Experience Professionals Association, or CXPA. One of the things I really enjoy is talking to leaders who represent organizations that are on the cutting edge of research and technology. So here at CXPA, we really understand that it can be a challenge to navigate the increasing amount of choices that you have when it comes to choosing a CX partner. So we want to help. We want to have conversations that shed light on the areas that really matter most to you as you consider how to best move CX in your organizations forward. So incredibly excited to welcome our guest today. He is an accomplished leader in the experience management field. He's often referred to as the godfather of CX. And he's no stranger to CXPA because he co-founded our association 10 years ago. And as the head of the Qualtrics XM Institute, he researches experience management trends and best practices. He publishes thought leadership content. He speaks at conferences and events. He advises executives. He inspires others to make big improvements in the experiences of people around the world. And he's an overall very busy man. So welcome to Bruce Temkin, CCXP. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Gabe. It's great to be here. As a matter of fact, it's always great to be at any CXPA event.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Bruce, as I mentioned in your intro, you have a tremendous breadth of knowledge and experience in our field. And, as you think back to a decade ago, what was your impetus for the formation of the CXPA?
Gabe, there were people doing little elements of what we would now call customer experience work across many companies, and no one knew that there were other people doing similar things. So there weren't any shared practices or common terminology. I knew that CX was important for companies and for society as a whole, and it would only thrive as a domain if we codified it in some way. So creating a nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of the CX profession seemed like the best way to nurture and expand the field of CX.
That's fantastic. I love that. I'm so inspired by, the history of the CXPA. And, as you look back at the field over the past decade, how have you seen our discipline grow and change?
First of all, the growth of the CX field has been amazing to see. Not just sort of the practices, but the community, right? I will tell you, there are no better people on earth than the community of XM professionals. When we started, people didn't know what voice of the customer meant. And there was no concept of things like a customer journey map. Now, those are just baseline concepts that XM professionals, CX professionals take for granted. It's also wonderful to see the underlying practices that emerged in CX being applied to other areas like employee experience, product experience, and brand experience. We've gone from 10 years ago where there were little acts of customer experience spread across many different areas to a time and place when CX professionals are starting to master some of the most advanced techniques in organizations, and customer experience is a real profession that's being done by real amazing professionals.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. You mentioned community. That's certainly for me the most inspiring part of what we get to do here at CXPA and around the world, and seeing partners like Qualtrics and the communities that they've been able to establish as well. I want to level set because you mentioned XM, you mentioned CX. So for our audience, we define customer experience at CXPA as the perception that customers have of an organization that's formed across all interactions, all touch points, people, technology over time. So how do you define XM or experience management? How does that differ from CX?
Great question. And first of all, I love the definition, since it's substantively the definition we created over 10 years ago for CX. And that was like one of the things in customer experience, right? 10 years ago, no one had a definition for it. So it's wonderful to see that in 10 years, we're pretty much consistently using the same definition. Great work. So We define XM, experience management, as the discipline of using both experience data and operational data to design and improve the 4 core experiences of business: customer, employee, product, and brand. So most of the practices in XM have evolved from CX, or customer experience. So if you think about customer experiencing being one of the domains that uses experience management capabilities, probably the biggest one. If the overall experience management with CX as a part of it is really about how we use human-centric insights in a more ongoing way to run an organization. So CX is, in my mind, the leading edge of experience management.
Thanks for explaining that. That makes a lot of sense. And I want to ask you about the XM Institute. So what is the XM Institute and how is it related to Qualtrics?
Yeah. So XM Institute is just, think of us as a department within Qualtrics. But we run relatively independent. And so we look a lot like a think tank. So if you think about a research organization, like a McKinsey's research organization, or a Bain, or even a Forrester, we operate in a very similar way doing independent studies. I lead the organization, and our mission is really to empower and inspire XM professionals to radically improve human experiences. So we publish, as you mentioned earlier, we publish thought leadership benchmarks, develop training, lead a global community, whatever we can do to help people understand and adopt really good XM practices.
Yeah. And you mentioned independent research. I'd love to learn a little bit more about some of the research studies that you and your team have done over the past year. I'm sure there's so many topics that are ripe for exploration and investigation.
Oh my goodness. Like, I think what we struggle from is not that we can't find and research enough. It's just, what are we going to focus on with all of the great opportunities? So we published in any given year, and this year is no different, we published dozens of new resources. Some of our studies include a global analysis of the ROI of customer experience. As a part of that, we estimated that bad experiences were putting $4.7 trillion at risk around the world. Yes, I did say that. $4.7 trillion of risk around the world because of bad experience. We examined how people around the world answer the Net Promoter Score differently, right? So we've done a lot of research so that people understand that if you use Net Promoter Score in Japan and you use Net Promoter Score in the US, you are going to get different results and you can't interpret them in the same way. We've developed a global index of momentum for online activities post-COVID, right? Really understanding the degree to which the adoption of some online activities, like doing videos with friends and family or online exercises, were going to continue after COVID, or whether they were going to slow down. We did a bunch of things around employees. So we estimated more than 74 million US employees will likely look for a new job in the future. And for us, we talk about that as being more about the great onboarding than the great resignation. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we've really sort of focused on trying to understand how people, whether they're employees or customers, are thinking about this crazy world we're in. So we published not only those research, we publish online training. We have great training, and it's free online training for how to build and mature a CX program, how to build and mature an employee experience program, and lots of tools. So this is where I'm going to give you a little plug, because I feel like anytime I'm talking about this stuff, people go, I want more. Just visit our website at xminstitute.com. All of those resources are free.
That is fantastic, Bruce. And I want to dive in because you mentioned some of the research that you've done around COVID. So obviously, this is something that continues to impact professionals in our field. Would love to learn more about what some of your findings are on how the pandemic has reshaped the role of CX or XM, as well as the professionals that do the work.
Yep. So I will answer that question, but I think it's sort of interesting to provide a little historical context. So when I was at Forrester, and really that's a time when I think a lot of the groundbreaking work I did to try and define some of the basics of customer experience. In 2018, which was when there was an economic downturn, my practice, and I was like leading the customer experience practice, was booming, right? The economy was down, customer experience was booming, because in downtimes, organizations tend to get much more focused on trying to understand and retain and have their organic growth, right? So there became a focus on CX that was renewed, that was like accelerated during that time. So we have a lot of that going on now. And I believe that customer experience and all of experience management is more important than ever in this moment. And so CX professionals are more important than ever. So our employee experience, brand experience, and product experience is more important than ever. And that's because in addition to that dynamic of having a downturn being an important time when people are just thinking about retaining the relationships they have, but COVID has reshaped the needs and desires of customers and employees around the world. And the only way to thrive, the only way to I think to do business in this environment successfully is to keep a pulse and respond to those changes. They're human beings who are going through changes. The only way you can succeed is to cater to those human needs. This requires organizations, in my mind, to double down on their entire portfolio of experience management activities.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and it aligns with what I've been seeing in the market, in the job market as well. Seeing so many posts from leading companies that are seeking qualified individuals to do this work. So I totally agree with you on that, and would love to learn a little bit more as well as to what your research has shown. How are consumers specifically changing behaviors and attitudes? I mean, I know you mentioned a few things, but would love to dive in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so a few things, right? Because sometimes it's hard to identify what are continuing activities in times of change, right? Like it's easy to say, okay, consumers are doing a lot of stuff online, right? So they're going to continue doing a lot of stuff online. We found that's not necessarily the case, right? There are some activities like online banking and online customer service that people have done more of, that they'll continue to do. But when we look across the globe, in some countries, people are going to completely stop going to religious services online as soon as they can. People are going to go back into gyms as soon as they can, right? So one of the underlying principles that I've had, and over the years to really understand sort of human behavior and human dynamic change, is that human beings are amazingly resilient. That's for good and bad, meaning that we will get back to many of our old behaviors in as fast as we can, right? As soon as we're able, we'll go to sports events and concerts, right? I remember when I was Qualtrics is located in Provo, which is right next to Salt Lake City, and our CEO is the owner of the Jazz. So I went to the Utah Jazz game, and it was sort of right when the stadium opened, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go because there was still some COVID going around. Obviously, used a mask, and I'd been vaccinated, but it was amazing to me that as soon as it opened, the stadium was full, right? People go back to norm. Now, having said that, COVID is doing something that I haven't seen in any other period of time, which is getting people fundamentally to rethink the priorities in their lives. This is what I think is going to be the biggest change. It's not that we're doing more online or less online. It's that people are rethinking priorities and changing how they want to both live and work. So it's like COVID created a moment of massive reflection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Massive reflection as people rethink their work-life priorities. And I think that will lead to many unforeseen changes over the next couple of years. So I'm like, I understand and I can project a lot of the online behaviors that will change, but people's demands and wants are still in a period of sort of transition.
Yeah. And so in the midst of this transition and change and upheaval that we've experienced, would love to learn a little bit more about Qualtrics's response to this. How is your organization responding to new pressures and demands that are being placed on people who do the work that we do?
Yep. No, great question. I'll start with XM Institute, then talk more broadly about Qualtrics. Right. We are a lot of our research really pivoted to being really specific and trying to be helpful to XM professionals to navigate this particular period in time. Right. So we had lots of recommendations and best practices around things like doing less trending of historical relationship data. Like your NPS study is less important than pulsing of customers to understand where they're at now. Getting organizations to focus more on employees as being the central component of being successful. And so we did that. Now, Qualtrics as a technology company invested heavily in supporting organizations around the world during this period. We developed and rolled out a free set of COVID-centric applications, things like checking on the well-being of employees, and made those available for free. And since then, we've created a whole bunch of applications that are specific for this environment. As a matter of fact, one of them, we have, I think, the first and leading edge application for collecting and validating the vaccine status of employees. We've made it easier than ever to quickly pulse customers and employees so that you can get the insights that you need in a timely manner, in an ongoing manner, in a very effective way. So you can understand what both customers and employees are thinking and feeling at any moment in time. And I think that's been, I think, one of the real values of Qualtrics as a platform for sure over this period, which is the immense flexibility that we've had. And we've tried to use that flexibility to create the specific applications that are necessary in this moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear, Bruce. And I want to reflect on something that you said a moment ago when you were talking about the fact that the pandemic has caused people to sort of step back and reassess some really important life questions. Alongside that, we have this phenomenon that many of us have heard about called the Great Resignation. I would love to learn more about what Qualtrics research is showing about the causes of this. I mean, is this a reaction to, people sort of doing this, deep dive reassessment? And then what are the impacts to employee experience? What are the impacts to customer experience? Would love to get your thoughts on this because I think it's such a critical topic right now.
This is a mammoth shift, right? I think I mentioned earlier, we found that there were a little over 72 million US employees that were likely to look for a new job. That was in research we had done. And I think the drivers, there are several drivers. I think the fundamental underlying driver that no one talks about is just the fact that human beings are taking this moment in time to reflect on their entire life, which we talked about earlier. And while they're doing that, while they're being pushed to do that because of like COVID and other things going on, they're evaluating the trade-off between working at home and working in an office, right? They're rethinking their careers and what they want to be doing, right? They're the balance of work and life for all shifts. So all those things are going on. And so I think that's pushing people as people reflect and think about what they want to be doing and deciding whether they want to work remotely or at home or wherever, that many people that energy is pushing many people to say, hey, I'm not in the role in the company I want to be in right now. So it is causing what people like to call the Great Resignation. I don't like to call it that because I feel like that's not where organizations need to focus. So in in the study where I published the 72 million US employees leaving, I talk about the great onboarding, because I think that if you think about it, if 72 million people are leaving the companies they're working for and they're not leaving the workforce, then they're going someplace else, which means that yes, you are likely to lose some employees, but this is an opportunity to recruit and onboard the best of the best. So that's why I like to call it the great onboarding, is what you should be focused on. How do you actually make your organization the best place for people to work, and make it a destination for those really outstanding employees that you want to come on. I think that this is actually a win-win in the long run. So I think, part of your question was, what does this do for customer experience? And I think that there's going to be there's some shakeups in customer experience, whether it's organizations that can't staff up enough to serve their customers, or some turnover that causes some problems. So you especially see it in some retail sectors, right? Whether it's a restaurant that can't get enough people, or a hotel that can't get the cleaning staff, right? There are going to be some disruptions. But I think in the long run, it's pushing organizations to be better employers, to create environments that are better for employees. And I think that will, in turn, because as we all know, engaged employees create better customer experience, that in the long run, this situation will end up with much better employee and customer experience for everyone.
Yeah, really fascinating insights there. The great onboarding, I really like that reframing. You've heard from CX professionals who are sitting there thinking, gosh, I've spent all this time in capital and making sure that I'm getting, embedding a customer-centric culture. And then, I have, as I heard recently, 20,000 of my 80,000 employees that have turned over recently. And, I like the way that you've framed that. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity.
Yeah, I think we're in the, that's sort of a good description of where we're at now, right? We are in the middle of it. It's a challenge for everyone, right? Challenge for individual, challenge. Every organization I know is being challenged. Just about every individual is challenging themselves in some way, right? But most of these challenges are pushing us to be better portions of ourselves. It's pushing organizations to be better at focusing on human beings. It's pushing us as individuals to really think about what motivates us and makes us happy. So all of those things, I think, after we get through this period, will end up collectively in a better place.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you, because we're talking about, sort of when we get through this, and obviously there are a lot of uncertainties, there are a lot of outstanding questions that we don't yet know answers to for 2022. But given some of what you've learned through your research, given some of the trends you've seen, given some of these impacts, what is your outlook or some key predictions that you have for the coming year?
So I'll put together just sort of one overarching prediction, right, and capture it in sort of what we're labeling next year. So XM Institute is about to label 2022 as the year of agility, because as we've been talking about, we expect to see ongoing shifts in the needs and desires of customers, employees, and the organizations that succeed will be the ones that best sense and respond to these shifts. It's a perfect environment for every aspect of XM, right? And we mentioned that earlier. So I think that what's going to happen this year, 2022, is that organizations will continue to pivot, right? They'll be pivoting their product lines. They'll be pivoting their market segments. They'll be pivoting their employer brands, right? There'll be a lot of agility. And so we're actually going to be dedicating a lot of our research and the things that we talk about as helping organizations think about how do they shift from, and when I look at how organizations are aligned and how they operate on historical foundation of reinforcing stability. I won't bore you with all the details now, but going back to the production era, which is where most organizations' foundations are, things like annual strategic planning, all that stuff is really built around an environment. So how do we maintain stability? So I think in 2022, as the year of agility kicks in, organizations have to rethink what they do. Simple, I don't say simple, but like one of the things is just the shift from strategic planning to the scenario driving, right? The idea of going, in historical time, and even 2 years ago, we'd create a strategy, right? We'd say, okay, here's what we think the year ahead is going to look like, and let's just all get on board to get this one thing done because we're all aligned on what's going to happen. I don't think that's how you succeed in 2022. I think you succeed in 2022 by saying, okay, we think potentially one of these three scenarios are going to happen. What's our strategy and plan for each one of those three? Let's go down one, but be ready to quickly snap to one of the other ones. And oh, by the way, recognize even though we identified three scenarios, there might be a fourth one that actually happens. So I think we're going to be really focused on building agility inside of organizations next year.
Yeah, really fascinating, Bruce, to think about this almost sort of in my mind. I was picturing sort of a war games sort of planning mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like a guerrilla warfare, right? You can't commit to the long term without being able to respond to each and every battle that you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to shift gears just a little bit because I know many of our viewers have heard of Qualtrics, but they really may not be aware of the breadth of solutions that Qualtrics offers. So just want to get your take on what our viewers should know about the Qualtrics suite of solutions, both small and big.
Yep. So, most people know that I'm like the last person to advertise for Qualtrics or like any technology platform. So, I have to answer the questions because you asked it, and I'm very proud of Qualtrics.
Yeah.
And what I would say is for the viewers to think about is Qualtrics is like the dominant platform in the space, right? The largest customer experience player, the largest employee experience player, the really the only platform that is from ground up built to handle all aspects of experience management. And I think our scale it shows up in like recent acquisitions we made. We acquired Clarabridge. So many people may know Clarabridge, right? The most dominant text analytics or conversational analytics player in the market. We acquired UserMind, which is a leader in journey orchestration. So I think we probably have more, and don't hold me to this, but I think it's true. We probably have more R&D invested in our platform than everyone else put together. Like I said, the people may judge that, but that's sort of the type of scale we have, and it's captured in. Gartner just did its voice of the customer magic quadrant, and we were in the upper right, which is where everyone wants to be. And I think they named us as the safe choice for professionals in the space, given our breadth of capabilities and the massive ongoing investments we make in developing and improving the platform. So if you think about Qualtrics, think about like a very large and growing tech company that is heavily investing and using our scale to make it easier to drive action from insights across lots of different specific use cases, whether you're running a Net Promoter Score relational program or a contact center interaction program, or you're a healthcare provider that's rethinking its patient experience measurement and design system. All of that is sort of the key focus area of Qualtrics. And in addition to just the CX, we're doing that with employee experience. So if you're doing employee engagement programs or 360-degree employee reviews, all of that can be handled inherently with the Qualtrics and effectively with the Qualtrics XM platform.
Thanks, Bruce. I said at the top of the program, and I really believe this to be true, experienced professionals face very difficult choices. And I've been in these conversations where, you're trying to figure out, what platform is going to best meet what your organization needs, both now and in the future. And so I think these are really valuable conversations to have to sort of suss out what makes Qualtrics really unique. And so, I know there are a lot of different solutions. Qualtrics has a very robust suite of services, but I would love to learn a little bit more about what would the benefit be for an organization to take advantage of that full suite of services rather than using different solutions from different providers?
That's a great question, and I think it's interesting because I think that in any sort of young market, organizations pick different players to piece things together because they don't yet see that there is a bigger construct. And I think what we're finding is that organizations are starting to see that experience management is in fact a collective capability. And so as organizations do more around experience management, whether it's expanding from a small CX program to a multifaceted CX program that runs around the world, or whether it's taking a CX program and adding employee experience or brand experience element to it, as you start to grow and expand, you start to realize that there's a lot of costs associated with multiple platforms that don't necessarily talk to each other. You have to learn how to use them all. You can't take the expertise you have on one and use it in another. You have to license and understand the licensing models of all these different technology providers. So having an organization that has integrated all of those pieces and is investing and growing and expanding it can be really valuable, and make it easier for you to propel your experience management capabilities and customer experience, employee experience. So that's one, I think, absolutely key area. The other area that people hardly ever think about is how are we managing our experience data? So if you think about organizations, they have a ton of platforms where they're focusing on managing their their operational data. That includes customer data in their CRM apps, right? Includes financial data in their financial apps, includes employee data in their HR apps, right? So there's all of this operational data that's well controlled and managed in systems. But when it comes to understanding feedback from customers, feedback from employees, that's scattered across an organization. The more that an organization commits to experience management, the more they understand that their experience data is incredibly valuable, maybe more valuable than some of their operational data. So it shouldn't sit scattered across multiple systems and even on like Excel spreadsheets on individual desktops, right? So you start to see this combination of not only is it that a platform is more valuable because you can extend it more quickly and use it more effectively across lots of use cases, but having a single platform allows you to start to control and manage and take advantage of the experience data so you can better understand what every individual, whether a customer or employee, is thinking and feeling.
Bruce Temkin is the head of the Qualtrics XM Institute. Bruce, thank you for a very enjoyable, illuminating conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabe. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to any CXPA community event.
And be sure to follow Bruce on Twitter at btemkin. And if you want to find out how consumer behavior and preferences will change in the year ahead and what you can do to attract and retain customers moving forward, be sure to download Qualtrics 2022 Customer Trends ebook by clicking the link in the comments. And from all of us here at CXPA, wishing you a fantastic and fulfilling